guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a controversial topic here in Australia, but we're going to talk about January 26th, where the most festive thing is my shirt. That's putting that out there. I got the shirt because I thought it looked cool. It says like Gold Coast as Sydney, some cool Aboriginal art. It's a wombat with an echidna sitting on it. Uluru, boxing kangaroo, all sorts of fun stuff. What's not fun is the history of the day. And as you can tell by the title, I have some thoughts. I've got here some images from I've got here some images from a Instagram post that I saw, and I thought that they were relevant. So I screenshot them, and I'm going to read them to you because they're text ones. Let me just double check. I think there's 8 in total. There's 9 in total. Okay, so there's 9 in total. Okay, we went real weird there for a second. Cool, so there's 9 of them. So the first one has why January 26th is significant. Since 1994, January 26th has been dubiously celebrated in each state and territory as Australia Day, observing the day that Captain Arthur Phillip founded the penal colony of New South Wales on already occupied Aboriginal land by raising an oversized Union Jack at Sydney Cove in 1788. This day marks the beginning of colonial violence, illegal occupation, dispossession of land, and attempted genocide. So not exactly the sort of thing you would want to celebrate. That's like the Germans celebrating the day Auschwitz was opened. Not really a great idea. The second one says Australia was not an undiscovered empty continent. To affirm that Australia was discovered is to actively erase history and to perpetuate the idea of terra nullius, which is what Australia had been labelled as by the British, and therefore how they were able to colonise it. By calling it terra nullius, if you are unaware, basically means that they're calling it land that is owned by no one. Despite the fact that even before they had landed, they would have seen the Aboriginals that lived in the area coming to investigate what these ships were doing, sailing towards them. Archaeological evidence ties Aboriginal people to the mainland of Australia over 65,000 years ago, but history books are laced with the false pretense of discovery to legitimise ongoing colonial invasion. British settlement was far from peaceful. It's estimated that between 1778 and 1900, population of Aboriginal people decreased by a devastating 90%. And considering that they'd been here for, as we just mentioned, 65,000 years, they are potentially the oldest surviving culture. So the fact that there's still a 10% of them as of 1900, not even as of today, like over 100 years ago, is despite the sugar-coated narratives of a peaceful British settlement, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people actively resisted the British from the moment they invaded the country. The resistance, however, was met with brutal and calculated massacres against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including children. And when you consider that they would have been fighting with their primitive tools of spears and boomerangs against the British's guns and maybe even the cannons off their ships, yeah, not a whole heap of a chance. I'll try to find some information on a thing I just thought of in a second. In the year I believe it was centenary. I think it was January 1st, 1901, Australia was declared like an independent nation from Britain. We still have the Governor General, but we have our own government now. And so, you know, yeah, basically up until then, the British got to say what went on, and that's, yeah, probably a big factor here. By 1911, every state and territory in Australia had introduced protection policies, which gave the government almost full control over the lives of First Nations people, who were denied basic rights, including the freedom of movement, where they could live, custody of their own children, something that went on until, I could be wrong, but I think 60s, potentially into the 70s, I think. I'm not entirely sure. I know that it still affects people today. Like, there are still people alive who were part of the stolen generations, which is disgusting. It also restricted their right to marry and their right to practice culture and speak their own language. Essentially, each state was trying to assimilate them into colonial society and essentially erase Aboriginal culture, which is a fucking crime, because look at this beautiful art. Look at it. So under the approach of black inferiority and white superiority, the government attempted to assimilate, like I just said. Now, here's the thing to the people that want to argue that it's always been like this. Many Australians are fixated on the concept that the National Day has been celebrated on January 26 since the Union Jack was first planted on Aboriginal land. In actual fact, the first official Australia Day was observed on the 30th of July 1915, and in that particular case, it was to raise funds for World War I. Again, it wasn't until 1994, the year I was born, that all states and territories across Australia landed on the national holiday, which, yeah, 27 years ago. It's only been celebrated for 27 years on that particular day. Earlier than that, Aboriginal people had declared it a day of mourning before it was ever celebrated as a national holiday, as the country insensitively prepared to celebrate 150 years of European settlement in 1938. A large group of Aboriginal people donned in black clothing as a sign of mourning made protest against the mistreatment of Aboriginal people and against the white man's seizure of the country. The Day of Mourning was one of the first major civil rights gatherings in the world. Remembering that the civil rights in America was, again, I think the 60s. So this predates that by more than 20 years. The 26th of January 1938 is not a day of rejoicing for Australia's Aborigines, it's a day of mourning. Now the comment of, it happened 200 years ago, why can't we just get over it or move past it or whatever, It's important to recognise that colonialism is an ongoing process and isn't a thing of the past. It didn't end. Colonialism didn't end 200 years ago. It's as prevalent today and has its roots deeply planted in every part of our society. And I hope I'm pronouncing this person's name correctly, Nayuka Gori wrote in their article in 2019, 2 years ago, colonialism manifests in black incarceration rates, child removal rates, assimilation in the form of education and entertainment. So why don't we call Australia Day for what it is, a legacy of invasion and a day of survival. Despite the government's mistargeted intentions and the nice words that dance across the Australia Day Council website, Australia Day is not a harmonious celebration for all. It does not foster truth-telling. It does not respect all people, nor does it address the continued colonial violence. Our soil was, and the "our" here is First National people, but I'm just reading the image. Our soil was stolen. Our land that abounds in nature's gifts is constantly being fracked. Our people are dying young and at the hands of the people who are meant to protect us, yet we are expected to celebrate. And rightfully so. The last one's just a quote. It says, "Let's call Australia Day for what it is, a legacy of invasion and a birthday for Anglo-Australia. Anglo-Australia was born on the bodies of Aboriginal people." Now, there is a bit that I would like to look at, because I happen to know when the first time a white man was actually charged with the murder of Aboriginal people. It was the Mile Creek Massacre. There we are. Which happened in, when the tab wants to load, uh, 1838. So that's 50 years. 50 years? So for the first 50 years, they were just slaughtering without any repercussions. And it wasn't the first massacre, it wasn't the last massacre, but early in the morning of 18th of December 1838, 7 men were publicly hanged at the Sydney jail. They were the first British subjects to be executed for massacring Aboriginal people. Mile Creek Massacre was neither the first nor the last massacre, but the New South Wales Supreme Court trials that followed set a judicial precedent. However, attitudes towards such massacres took longer to change. But yeah, so it took them 50 years to even acknowledge that killing these people should maybe be punishable by death, which would have just been the penalty for murder at the time. Considering that by that stage they're still all convicts coming across. I do also hear the argument occasionally, and it's one that I could use if I wasn't being insensitive, of we didn't choose to come over here either. Going on along the lines of the criminals that came, but all of the sailors and the people in charge of looking after the criminals did. Unless you can say with 100% certainty that none of those people are in your family tree, then it's it's not a foolproof defense. Also, kind of technically did, because they're all convicts. They're all criminals. They were not following the laws of their own land. And I mean, in my family, I have at least one ancestor that came over as part of the first fleet. So like I said, I could claim that if I wasn't, trying not to be insensitive. But again, I still garner privilege despite having come across as a convict because I have the British background. So I still got that privilege in my ancestry, and it's not something to be proud of. To sort of wrap this all up, because it is a soft subject, and there are people who know far more about what could be done or what should be done. I've heard people say that we should put it on May 8th because that can just be said as mate, which kind of a stereotypical greeting these days, like mate. I mean, hell, we have a television station that's called that. But I think if it doesn't move, assuming it doesn't move, which it 100% should, to some other day, July 30th, right? We'll put it back there where it was in 1915, and then if we need to have a celebration of some kind, celebration's not the right word, if we need to observe this particular day, it should be a commemoration similar to Anzac Day or Remembrance Day, except that this one, instead of honouring World War I or World War II vets, honours First Nations people. There should be a big parade like what happens at Mardi Gras, but it's all Aboriginal people down the same street in Sydney on that day, and it should celebrate their culture. It should be a day of learning for anyone not of that culture. If we have to do anything on that day at all, it shouldn't be about playing backyard cricket and having a barbecue. It should be about learning about the traditional custodians of the land, and trying to get to know their culture, because it's really interesting. I personally would love, I mean, this is just me personally, I love mythology, and I would love to know the mythology of the land I was born in, because it is predominantly an oral tradition, to hear it, and I would love to talk to some elders and just find out about their culture. I'd love to do that. It's just unfortunate that in my search to try and find that, I've thus far come up empty. Like I don't know where to go to be able to have that conversation. I think the other part too, though, is that I'm a little bit concerned that if I did, in my being curious and not knowing, I may come across as insensitive, and that's not what I want to do. So there's that as well. But that's all I've got for this video. I'm not going to ask you to thumbs up, I'm not going to ask you to comment. What I am going to ask you to do, though, is to go and if you still want to just waste time on the internet, go and look up Aboriginal culture online. Use this as an opportunity to go and spend 5 or 10 minutes, learning the myth of, the rainbow serpent, or what exactly is the difference between a bunyip and a yowie, or whatever it might be. Because they are very interesting people, and the amount of people that can speak an Aboriginal language these days is diminishing. Something needs to be done about that. But that's all I've got for this video, so until next time, guys, keep your head screwed on.